In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury was a way of life, there was a restaurant that stood out even among the glitziest spots in town. This place wasn't just about food, it was an experience, a temple for those who wanted to be seen dining at the right table with the right people. On this particular evening, one of its most frequent patrons had taken his usual seat in the corner. He liked it there because it gave him a perfect view of everyone entering while keeping him slightly hidden from prying eyes. This man was no ordinary diner. His name carried weight. Victor Langley, a self-made billionaire known as much for his sharp suits as for his sharper tongue. Victor had built his empire on innovation and ruthlessness, two qualities he believed went hand in hand. Tonight, though, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. Instead, he sat slouched in his chair, scrolling through emails on his phone, ignoring the world around him. The restaurant buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses and the occasional burst of laughter, but none of it reached him. A young woman approached his table, her sneakers barely audible against the polished floor. She wore the uniform of the staff, an apron tied neatly over her black pants and white shirt. Her name tag gleamed under the soft lighting. Tanya. She greeted him warmly, her voice carrying a hint of practiced cheerfulness. "Good evening, sir. Our special today is seafood risotto. Chef recommends it highly." Victor didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, it was with a detached glance, like someone sizing up a stranger they'd never meet again. Without missing a beat, he nodded curtly and waved her off. Tanya hesitated for a fraction of a second, perhaps hoping for a more engaging response, but then turned to leave. That's when Victor noticed something unusual. Written across her apron in elegant cursive were the words, "La patience est une vertu." His lips curled into a smirk. To him it felt ironic, a waitress wearing a French phrase about patience. It seemed almost pretentious given the setting. Before he could stop himself, he called out, "Hey, hold on." Tanya stopped mid-step and turned back toward him. There was a flicker of apprehension in her eyes, but she masked it quickly with professionalism. "If you're so smart," Victor said, his tone dripping with mockery, "why don't you translate that for me?" The room didn't go silent, it rarely did in such a busy place, but for Tanya, it might as well have. For a moment she froze, caught between irritation and disbelief. But she recovered faster than he expected. With a calmness that surprised, even herself, she replied, "It means patience is a virtue, sir." Then, without waiting for a reaction, she walked away, leaving Victor chuckling softly to himself. What Victor didn't realize was that his little jab had landed harder than he intended. As Tanya disappeared behind the swinging kitchen doors, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her co-workers glanced at her curiously, sensing something was off. They knew better than to ask directly. This wasn't the first time someone had made a snide remark to her during a shift, but they exchanged knowing looks all the same. Back at the table, Victor leaned back in his chair, still amused by the exchange. He replayed it in his mind, congratulating himself on his cleverness. After all, what harm was there in poking fun at someone who probably didn't understand the deeper meaning of the phrase anyway? Or so he thought. What he failed to notice was the quiet strength in Tanya's demeanor, the way she held herself despite his comment. And what he couldn't possibly know yet was that this seemingly insignificant moment would soon spiral into something far greater for both of them. As the night wore on, Victor found himself distracted. Every time Tanya passed by his table, whether delivering another course or clearing plates, he couldn't help but watch her movements. There was a grace about her, an ease that seemed out of place in the chaotic rhythm of the restaurant. Something about her intrigued him, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't snapped back at him, hadn't shown any sign of anger or frustration. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something he wouldn't fully grasp until much later. For now, though, Victor pushed these thoughts aside. He paid his bill, left a generous tip as always, and stepped out into the cool Manhattan air. The city lights dazzled around him, but his mind kept drifting back to the restaurant, and to the waitress whose quiet dignity had somehow managed to unsettle him. Little did he know, Their encounter was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, humility, and the power of human connection. The next morning, Victor woke up with the same uneasy feeling he'd gone to bed with. It wasn't guilt, no, he still refused to call it that. But there was definitely something nagging at him, like a loose thread in an otherwise perfectly tailored suit. He tried to distract himself by diving into work emails and scrolling through social media. But no matter what he did, his thoughts kept circling back to the waitress from the night before. At first, he told himself it was ridiculous. Why should he care about one random interaction? People said thoughtless things all the time, it was part of being human. But deep down, he knew this was different. There had been something in her response, something unshakable and dignified, that made him feel small in a way he wasn't used to. And then, there was the phrase on her apron, "La patience est une vertu." Patience is a virtue. The words seemed to mock him now, as if they were reminding him of his own lack of it. Unable to shake the feeling, Victor grabbed his phone and opened a search engine. He typed in "Waitress French restaurant" and hit enter, half expecting nothing useful to come up. To his surprise, though, a few results caught his eye. One of them led him to a blog post featuring interviews with employees from various restaurants around the city. Scrolling through the article, he stopped cold when he saw a photo of the woman from last night, the waitress who had so effortlessly translated his sarcastic challenge. Her smile in the picture was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the polite but distant expression she'd worn while dealing with him. Curiosity took over, and Victor clicked on the link attached to the photo. It led him to a personal website filled with articles, essays, and even academic papers, all written by her. He scrolled through page after page, each discovery more surprising than the last. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a published translator whose work had appeared in respected journals. She volunteered teaching languages to underserved communities and was raising funds to start a nonprofit aimed at making education accessible to everyone, regardless of their background. Victor leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. In his mind, waitresses were temporary workers, people passing through until they found something better. But here was someone using her job not as a stepping stone, but as a means to support her real passion, a passion that clearly ran much deeper than anything he'd assumed. As he read testimonial after testimonial from students and colleagues, praising her dedication and kindness, Victor felt a strange mix of admiration and shame creeping over him. One former student wrote, "She taught me French when no one else believed I could learn. Now I'm applying to study abroad because of her." Another mentioned how she inspired confidence in people who felt invisible. These weren't just compliments, they were life-changing impacts. And yet here he was, dismissing her offhand because of where she worked. For the first time in years, Victor questioned his assumptions. How many others like her had he overlooked? How often had he judged someone based solely on their title or position without bothering to dig deeper? He closed the browser tab, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his desk. His chest felt heavy, weighed down by the realization of how wrong he'd been. That evening, unable to focus on anything else, Victor decided to return to the restaurant. He didn't know exactly why. He told himself it was curiosity, maybe. Even a desire to apologize, but deep down he knew it was more than that. He wanted to see her again, to hear her voice and look into her eyes, hoping to find some kind of absolution for his earlier behavior. When he arrived, the place was bustling as usual. Tanya was easy to spot, weaving between tables with practiced ease. She looked the same as she had the night before, calm and composed, but tonight she seemed almost radiant. As Victor approached her cautiously, she glanced up and recognized him immediately. For a split second, her expression hardened, but then she softened, masking her emotions behind a professional smile. "Good evening," she said politely, her tone measured. "Can I help you with something?" Victor hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. He hadn't planned this far ahead. Clearing his throat, he began awkwardly. "Look, about last night." That comment I made, it was uncalled for. I shouldn't have mocked you. Tanya blinked, clearly taken aback. Of all the things she might have expected him to say, an apology wasn't one of them. She studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his face. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she replied evenly. "But words can't erase actions." Her response stung, but Victor deserved it. He pressed on, determined to make amends. "I saw your work online," he admitted. "You're incredible at what you do. Honestly, I wish I'd known sooner." This time, Tanya's guard faltered slightly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a faint smile. "Apology accepted," she said softly. Then, after a pause, she added, "But remember, everyone deserves respect, even waitresses." Her words hung in the air between them, simple yet powerful. Victor nodded, feeling both humbled and oddly grateful. He realized then that this wasn't just about fixing a single mistake. It was about learning to see people differently, to value them for who they truly were, rather than the roles they played in his world. As Tanya excused herself to attend to another table, Victor stayed seated, watching her move gracefully through the crowded room. He noticed how customers lit up when she spoke to them, how her presence brought a sense of calm to the chaos. For the first time, he saw her not as a waitress, but as a person, someone with dreams, talents, and a heart full of purpose. That night marked the beginning of a shift in Victor's perspective. While he couldn't undo what he'd done, he could choose to grow from it. And as he left the restaurant, he resolved to carry that lesson with him, not just in this space, but in every corner of his life. The confrontation with Karen left Sarah feeling a storm of emotions, anger, frustration, and fear all swirling together. As she stood in her kitchen that evening, staring at the damaged package on her counter, she couldn't shake the thought of how close she had come to losing something so vital. The medication inside wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity, prescribed by her doctor and mandated by law. Without it, her health could deteriorate rapidly, leading to complications that might land her back in the hospital, or worse. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the day. How could someone be so careless, so dismissive of another person's well-being? Karen hadn't even bothered to ask what was inside the box before tossing it over the fence. To her, it was just trash, an eyesore ruining the pristine appearance of the neighborhood. But to Sarah, it represented stability, safety, and survival. Every pill, every dose was carefully calculated to keep her condition under control. And now, thanks to Karen's reckless actions, the medication had been exposed to the elements, potentially compromising its effectiveness. Sarah knew she couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just about her pride or teaching Karen a lesson, it was about accountability. If Karen could get away with this kind of behavior, who else might suffer the consequences? What if it happened again, not just to her, but to someone else in the neighborhood who relied on deliveries for their own medical needs? The thought made her blood run cold. Determined to take action, Sarah decided to start by gathering evidence. She carefully documented everything: the condition of the package, the tracking information showing it had been delivered properly, and photos of the damage caused when it was thrown over the fence. Then, she pulled out her phone and began drafting a detailed email to the delivery company, explaining what had happened and asking if they could provide any additional documentation to support her case. They responded quickly, confirming that the package had indeed been left in the designated spot, and apologizing for the inconvenience caused by its mishandling. With the delivery company's confirmation in hand, Sarah turned her attention to the next step: consulting professionals who could help her navigate the situation. First, she called her doctor, explaining the incident and expressing her concerns about whether the medication was still safe to use. Her doctor listened patiently, then advised her to inspect the contents thoroughly and report any signs of tampering or spoilage. Fortunately, the pills appeared intact, though Sarah couldn't shake the lingering worry that they might not work as intended. Next, Sarah reached out to a lawyer friend from work, hoping to get some legal advice. After hearing the details of the story, her friend explained that Karen's actions could potentially qualify as criminal behavior. If she knowingly interfered with your court-ordered medication, that's a serious offense, the lawyer said. It's worth looking into filing a formal complaint. Encouraged by this guidance, Sarah decided to take her case to the local police department. She gathered all the evidence she'd collected, the photos, the emails, and her medical documentation, and headed to the station the following morning. When she arrived, she was nervous but resolute. She explained the situation clearly, emphasizing the importance of the medication and the potential danger Karen's interference posed to her health. At first, the officers seemed hesitant, unsure whether this qualified as a criminal matter. But Sarah persisted, calmly outlining why Karen's actions went beyond mere annoyance and crossed into dangerous territory. As the officers reviewed her evidence, their expressions shifted from skepticism to concern. One of them nodded slowly, saying, "This isn't just about a package being moved. If what you're saying is true, this person knowingly jeopardized your access to critical medication. That's not okay." By the end of the meeting, the police agreed to investigate further. They assured Sarah that they would reach out to Karen to gather her side of the story, and if the evidence supported Sarah's claims, charges could be filed. Leaving the station, Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, she was glad that someone finally took her seriously. On the other hand, she knew this was only the beginning of what promised to be a long and complicated process. Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation between Sarah and Karen whispered among themselves, divided in their opinions. Some sympathized with Sarah, understanding the gravity of the situation and acknowledging how unreasonable Karen had been. Others, however, sided with Karen, arguing that Sarah should have found a better way to handle her deliveries and blaming her for leaving the package unattended in the first place. Karen herself seemed oblivious to the growing tension. When approached by investigators later that week, she initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming she had no idea the package contained medication. "I thought it was junk mail or something," she insisted, her tone defensive. "How was I supposed to know?" But when confronted with Sarah's evidence, including the clear labeling on the package indicating it contained pharmaceuticals, Karen's excuses began to crumble. Investigators pressed her further, asking why she hadn't checked or asked questions before taking matters into her own hands. Flustered, Karen struggled to defend herself, eventually admitting that she acted impulsively without considering the consequences. As news of the investigation reached the rest of the neighborhood, reactions varied widely. Some residents praised Sarah for standing up to Karen's bullying tactics, while others criticized her for involving the authorities in what they saw as a minor dispute. Online forums dedicated to local gossip lit up with heated discussions, with users debating whether Karen's actions warranted such drastic measures. The phrase HOA Karen quickly became a trending topic, drawing both ridicule and outrage from people across the community. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind she hadn't anticipated. Friends and acquaintances stopped her in the grocery store to offer words of support, while strangers sent messages of encouragement through social media. Reporters from local news outlets reached out, eager to hear her side of the story. First, Sarah hesitated to engage, unsure if she wanted the added attention. But after speaking with her lawyer, she realized that sharing her experience could raise awareness about the challenges faced by individuals relying on specialized medical care. By speaking out, she hoped to prevent similar incidents from happening to others. Despite the growing spotlight, Sarah remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her fight against Karen. It was about sending a message that rules, no matter how well-intentioned, should never come at the expense of compassion and humanity. She vowed to see the process through, determined to hold Karen accountable for her actions and ensure that justice was served. For Karen, the fallout was swift and severe. Once beloved, or at least tolerated, as the neighborhood's unofficial enforcer, she suddenly found herself isolated. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone embroiled in scandal. Even her fellow HOA members, once loyal allies, began questioning her judgment and leadership. At the next meeting, a motion was passed to remove her from her position as chairperson, citing concerns about her ability to act responsibly. Publicly humiliated and facing potential legal consequences, Karen attempted to salvage her reputation. She issued a vague apology, claiming she hadn't understood the severity of her actions and promising to do better in the future. But for many, it was too little, too late. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, and Karen's attempts at redemption fell flat. As the dust settled, Sarah reflected on everything that had transpired. While she was relieved to have taken a stand, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the way things had escalated. What started as a simple misunderstanding had spiraled into a full-blown conflict, exposing cracks in the foundation of their once close-knit community. Still, she reminded herself that sometimes difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths are necessary for growth. And so, life in the neighborhood continued, albeit with a newfound sense of caution. Neighbors greeted each other with polite smiles, but behind closed doors whispers lingered. The incident served as a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, tensions can boil over when empathy is replaced by rigidity. For Sarah, the battle was far from easy, but it was one worth fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to live in a world where kindness outweighed control. The days that followed Victor's apology were strange for both of them. For Tanya, life went on as usual. She worked long hours at the restaurant, attended her graduate classes, and spent evenings poring over textbooks and translation projects. But there was a subtle shift in how she felt about the billionaire who had mocked her. His apology had been unexpected, and while it didn't erase what happened, it did make her see him differently. Maybe he wasn't just another entitled rich guy. Maybe he was someone capable of growth. For Victor, however, things weren't quite so simple. That night at the restaurant stayed with him like an unshakable shadow. He couldn't stop thinking about Tanya, the quiet strength in her voice, the way she carried herself despite his earlier insult. It gnawed at him, not because he wanted to forget, but because he couldn't let go. Every time he sat in a meeting or walked into a room full of people, he found himself wondering, what am I missing? Who else am I underestimating? One afternoon, as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city bustle below, Victor decided to take action. He pulled up his laptop and began researching nonprofits focused on education access. The more he read, the more inspired he became. Then, almost instinctively, he typed in the name of Tanya's initiative, the one he'd stumbled upon during his late-night search. Her vision resonated deeply with him. She wanted to create opportunities for underserved communities to learn languages, believing that language could open doors no matter where you came from. Victor leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. He knew he had resources most people only dreamed of. What if he used them to help her bring her dream to life? It wouldn't fix everything, not even close, but it would be a start. With a mix of excitement and hesitation, he drafted an email, offering funding for her project. He kept it anonymous, signing off simply as a friend. Sending it felt like taking a leap into unknown territory, but also strangely liberating. When Tanya received the email later that week, she read it twice before fully processing what it meant. A generous donor, someone who wished to remain unnamed, wanted to support her nonprofit. The amount offered was enough to cover startup costs and then some. At first, she assumed it was a prank or some kind of mistake, but when she replied cautiously, asking for clarification, the response confirmed everything. Whoever this person was, they believed in her work, and they were willing to back it financially. Tanya wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was thrilled. This was the breakthrough she'd been praying for, the chance to turn years of hard work into something tangible. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious benefactor might have ulterior motives. Was it guilt money? Or worse, charity disguised as generosity? Still, she accepted the offer, deciding to focus on the opportunity rather than the source. Meanwhile, Victor threw himself into small but meaningful changes in his own life. He started listening more, at meetings, during conversations, even when ordering coffee. Instead of assuming he already knew the answers, he began asking questions. Colleagues noticed the shift immediately, One of them joked, "Did you hit your head or something?" But beneath the teasing tone was genuine appreciation. People responded to his newfound openness, and slowly, relationships that had once been transactional began to feel more authentic. At the same time, Victor made it a point to visit the restaurant again. Not every night, of course, that would have been too obvious, but often enough to check in on Tanya. Their interactions were brief but polite. Sometimes she'd share updates about her nonprofit, explaining how the funds were helping secure classroom space and materials. Other times, they'd simply exchange pleasantries, each interaction building a fragile bridge between two very different worlds. Over time, Tanya grew less guarded around him. She still remembered his cutting remark from that first night, but she also saw glimpses of change in him. There was sincerity in his curiosity, humility in his willingness to learn, and though she remained cautious, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was trying. For Victor, these encounters became moments of reflection. Watching Tanya juggle her responsibilities while pursuing her dreams reminded him of his younger self, the relentless drive, the sacrifices, the belief that success was worth whatever it took. But it also highlighted something he'd lost along the way: perspective. Somewhere between climbing the corporate ladder and accumulating wealth, he'd forgotten what truly mattered. Now, standing on the sidelines of Tanya's journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, after the dinner rush had slowed, Victor lingered at his usual table longer than usual. When Tanya approached to refill his water glass, he stopped, her gently. "Do you ever regret working here?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself with the question. She tilted her head, considering his words carefully. "Regret isn't really part of my vocabulary," she said finally, her tone light but thoughtful. "This job pays the bills while I work toward bigger goals. Besides, it teaches me patience, which is fitting, given the quote on my apron." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're remarkable, you know that?" Tanya raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I'm just doing what I need to do." "No," he insisted, leaning forward slightly. "You're doing more than that. You're inspiring people. You're changing lives, including mine." Her expression softened, though she still looked wary. "Change is good," she said simply, "but it has to come from within." Victor nodded, letting her words sink in. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background. In that shared quiet, something shifted, not dramatically but enough to signal progress. For the first time, Victor felt like he was seeing the world through clearer eyes. And Tanya, for all her reservations, began to hope that perhaps this man really was capable of becoming better. As the weeks turned into months, their paths continued to cross, each meeting leaving its mark. Neither of them realized it yet, but their story was far from over. From a single careless remark had grown a connection neither expected, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness and understanding could ripple outward, touching lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. As months passed, Victor's involvement with Tanya's nonprofit grew deeper. What started as an anonymous donation had turned into something far more personal, a chance to step outside his usual world and immerse himself in a cause that mattered. He wasn't just writing checks anymore. He was showing up, rolling up his sleeves, and learning firsthand about the challenges faced by underserved communities. It was messy, unpredictable, and often exhausting, but it was also eye-opening. Tanya noticed the change in him too. At first, she'd been wary of his presence, unsure if his sudden interest in her work was genuine or just another way for him to ease his conscience. But over time, she began to see glimpses of sincerity, moments when he dropped the polished exterior and let his guard down. Like the Saturday morning he spent helping set up classrooms, only to trip over a stack of textbooks and send them tumbling across the floor. Everyone laughed, including Victor, who brushed off his clumsiness with a self-deprecating joke. Or the evening when he stayed late to help clean up after a language workshop, quietly sweeping floors without being asked. These small acts added up, chipping away at the walls between them. They still came from different worlds, his filled with luxury cars and private jets, hers shaped by hard work and sacrifice, but those differences no longer felt insurmountable. Instead, they became points of connection, opportunities for both of them to learn and grow. One day, during a break, between classes, Tanya found herself sitting beside Victor on a worn-out bench outside the community center. The air was crisp, carrying hints of autumn leaves and distant traffic. Students milled around nearby, chatting excitedly in broken French and Spanish, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. "You've come a long way," Tanya said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Her tone was light, almost teasing, but there was warmth in her voice. Victor glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Well, look at you." She gestured toward him, taking in his slightly wrinkled shirt and hands stained with marker ink. "You're not exactly the same guy who walked into that restaurant months ago," he chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess I'm not." "Good," she said simply, "because that guy was kind of a jerk." Her bluntness caught him off guard, but then he laughed, a real hearty laugh that seemed to surprise even him. "Fair enough," he admitted. "I deserved that." They sat in silence for a moment, watching students practice vocabulary games under the watchful eyes of volunteer teachers. Finally, Victor spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Do you think people can really change? Or are we stuck being whoever we were before?" Tanya considered the question carefully. "I think everyone has the potential to change," she said slowly. "But it's not easy. Change takes effort, patience, and humility. You have to be willing to admit you don't know everything and that you might have been wrong." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "And what about forgiveness? Do you think people deserve second chances?" She smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "That depends. Are they willing to earn it?" Her words lingered in the air, simple yet profound. Victor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let them sink in, feeling their weight settle deep within him. He knew she was talking about more than just him. It was a lesson she'd clearly learned through her own experiences, one she carried with grace and wisdom beyond her years. A ripple effect. As the nonprofit gained momentum, its impact began to spread beyond the classroom. Students who once struggled to string together basic sentences now held conversations confidently in multiple languages. Parents attended open houses, proudly watching their children perform skits and recite poems in French and Spanish. Local. Businesses offered internships to older students, recognizing the value of bilingual skills in today's global economy. Victor played a key role in amplifying these successes. Using his connections, he arranged partnerships with schools and companies eager to support the initiative. He hosted fundraising events at upscale venues, bringing together influential figures who might otherwise never have heard of the nonprofit. And while some attendees came purely out of curiosity, or perhaps to rub elbows with a billionaire, they left inspired by stories of resilience and determination. One such event stood out in particular. Held at a chic downtown gallery, the fundraiser drew a crowd of executives, philanthropists, and media personalities. Tanya stood nervously at the podium, clutching index cards scribbled with notes. Public speaking wasn't her strong suit, but tonight she wanted to share her journey. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had believed in her vision. "Growing up, I didn't always have access to resources others took for granted," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "There were times when I doubted whether my dreams were possible. But I kept going because I believed education could change lives, including mine." She paused, scanning the room. Faces softened, attentive and engaged. "This nonprofit isn't just about teaching languages. It's about giving people tools to rewrite their futures. Every student here is proof that opportunity can transform lives." When she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Victor watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. He hadn't written her speech or coached her beforehand. This was all her. And seeing her shine like this, owning her story with such authenticity, reminded him why he'd chosen to get involved in the first place. Afterward, guests mingled over hors d'oeuvres and champagne, many stopping to thank Tanya personally. One woman, a journalist covering the event, pulled her aside for an interview. "How does it feel to see your dream becoming reality?" she asked. Tanya hesitated, searching for the right words. "It feels hopeful," she said finally. "Not just for me, but for everyone who deserves a chance to succeed." The unspoken bond. Backstage, Victor waited patiently until the crowd dispersed. When Tanya finally emerged, looking exhausted but exhilarated, he handed her a glass of water. "You did great," he said sincerely. "Thanks," she replied, sipping gratefully. "Though I think I talked too fast. Half the audience probably didn't understand a word I said." "They understood plenty," he assured her. "Trust me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the party faded into the background, leaving only the quiet hum of shared accomplishment. Then, almost impulsively, Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "I wrote this earlier. Thought you should read it." Curious, Tanya unfolded the note. Written in neat handwriting were 3 sentences. "Patience is a virtue, so is kindness. Thank you for teaching me. Both." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You didn't have to." "But I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "You've changed my life, Tanya. More than you'll ever know." She nodded, unable to find the words to express how much his gesture meant. Instead, she simply smiled, a smile so full of gratitude and understanding that it spoke volumes. In that moment, something shifted between them. Their bond, forged through missteps and growth, had transformed into something rare and precious: mutual respect. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for now, they were content to stand side by side, united by a shared belief in the power of second chances and the endless possibilities of human connection.